This video will discuss chapter 10.6, the distance and midpoint formula. So I'm going to take a look at these two formulas to start. This first one is the distance formula. Distance equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So I'm going to take the difference of the x values and square it. Take the difference of the y values, I'm going to square it. I'm then going to add those two numbers together, and then I'm going to find the square root. That will give me distance. Midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2 for the x value, and then the y value is y1 plus y2 divided by 2 for the y value. So essentially, I'm taking the average of the x and the average of the y to find the midpoint, which makes sense when you think about what the midpoint might be. Okay? You may want to take a moment to pause the video so that you can copy down these formulas. We're going to use these formulas to solve the problems. We're going to start by using this first one, which is the distance formula, to solve this problem. What is the distance between 5, 3, and 1, negative 2? And so very similar to the way we found slope. If you remember how we were doing slope, you would go x1, y1, x2, y2. Now, it doesn't matter if you decide to call this x2, y2, and this x1, y1, as long as the first number is an x, the second number is a y, and these two have the same number, and these two have the same number. All right, so there are times when it might make sense to kind of group them, to switch the order around. All right, I'm going to use the formula, which is distance equals the square root of x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 5, and I'm going to square that, plus y2, which is negative 2, minus y1, which is 3, and I'm going to square that. Which means that distance equals, switch colors, distance equals the square root of negative 4 squared plus negative 5 squared. This means that distance equals the square root of 16 plus 25. Now, before we move on, I want to make sure that we see a couple of common mistakes. One is make sure that this is always a subtraction sign, this is always an addition sign. So sometimes you may be subtracting a negative number, right? But this will always be addition. So make sure that this, because that's part of the formula, is always addition. These two numbers will, in this particular formula, these two numbers will always be positive. They're always positive because it doesn't matter what number's in here. A positive number squared will give you a positive number. And like in this example, a negative number, negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So just be careful that you don't get negative 16 plus negative 25. It's a common mistake with this formula. And then my final answer is going to be distance equals the square root of 41. Now, you can leave your answer as the square root of 41. That is a number that's not rounded. If you type square root of 41 into calculator, you'll get something like 6.4 approximately. Okay, and you could round to that if you want to, but ideally we should start to get comfortable leaving answers in the radical form. All right, now let's talk about another way that we might use the distance formula, and that is a problem like this one. You got the distance between 4, 7 and A3 is 5 units. So in this particular problem, instead of finding the distance, they gave us the distance, and we need to find the x value. So we know that we'll call this one x1, y1. We can call this x2, y2. So distance equals the square root of x2, which is a, minus x1, which is 4, squared, plus we then have y2, which is 3, minus y1, which is 7, squared. All right, and now, sorry, I shouldn't have necessarily written distance because we actually know the distance. The distance is going to be 5, right? That was given to me. So you'll notice I only have one unknown so far. That's a. So I got 5 equals the square root of a minus 4 squared plus negative 4 squared. Okay, so this means I've got 5 equals the square root, and if I want to, what I'm going to do is if you remember a minus 4 squared, this is going to be, I'm going to use FOIL, or I could use a trick. I'll grab a different slide so we can do this one. I'm going to come back to that one in just a sec. So let's go a minus 4 squared. So that would be a minus 4 times a minus 4. So this is going to be, if you remember FOIL, doing something like this. Now there was a shortcut if you remember. We can talk about that one in a second. So this is going to be a squared minus 4a plus 16. A squared minus 4a plus 16. I can then put these terms together in the middle. This becomes a squared minus 8a plus 16. And if you remember, the shortcut was a squared minus 2a plus b squared, and that would get you straight from here to here. But so this, a minus 4 squared, equals that. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to put that into our problem. So this is going to be, so now I know a minus 4 squared is the same as a squared minus 8a plus 16 plus, and then 4 squared is another 16. So I now have 5 equals the square root of a squared minus 8a, and I'm going to put these together and get 32. All right, now what I want to do is take this side, that marker's not working, I'm going to take this side, I'm going to square it, and I'm going to take this side, I'm going to square it, and by squaring it, that will get rid of my square root sign, my radical sign, and then obviously I got to square this side, so 5 squared is 25 equals a squared minus 8a plus 32. Sorry, I'm running out of space. The good news is I got another slide ready to go. So at this point now, I don't know necessarily how to solve this problem. So what I want to do is make it equal to 0. So what I'm going to end up doing is subtracting 25 from both sides, and this is going to become a squared minus 8a plus 7. So to get the next step, I'm going to make this side equal 0. Show you what that's going to look like. After I subtract 25 from both sides, I should be left here. A squared minus 8a plus 7 equals 0. So all I did, subtract 25 from both sides. All right, now I'm here. Once I'm here, what I'm going to do is that trick we talked about a while ago, and that is going to be that 7 is on the bottom and negative 8 is on top. I'm looking for two numbers that when multiplied together would give me positive 7. When added together would give me negative 8. Those two numbers would be negative 7 and negative 1. So this is going to become x minus 7 times x minus 1 equals 0. And then from there I can just break this into two problems. X minus 7 equals 0. Minus, just be a minus, not an equal sign. X minus 1 equals 0. Add 7 to both sides over here, and I am left with x equals 7. Add 1 to both sides on this side, and I'm left with x equals 1. So remember, I got two answers now for x. Now, keep in mind, or I changed it to x. I really probably should have left this as, make a little bit more sense maybe if this were an a, right? Which would mean that this should be a, which means down here we would also have an a. Right now it doesn't matter what letter you use, but since the problem was using a, and I was solving for a, I'll keep it as an a, because when I come back to the first slide, it's going to make a little more sense. So my thing is that a equals 7 and a equals 1, which means that in this particular problem, if I put in a 7 or a 1 here for a, the distance between this point and either 7, 3 or 1, 3 is 5 units. And that makes sense, because if you think about this point, let's pretend this point were right here, I could either go 5 units this way or 5 units this way. Right? And so basically it's essentially like 1 is 5 forward and 1 is 5 back. So there will always be two answers to a problem like this, because you can always go 5 in each direction. It doesn't say which direction the 5 units is. All right, so The final problem I want to focus on is finding the midpoint. So to find the midpoint, we're going to use our midpoint formula, which is, we're going to say this x1, y1, x2, y2. So this is going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2. That's my first point. My second point is going to be y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Now just be careful with this. Remember, very careful with minus or negative signs. Remember that you're always adding in the formula. Negative 1 plus 3 is going to be positive 2 over 2. And then over here I got negative 2 plus negative 4. This should be negative 6 over 2. And then this is going to simplify. You don't necessarily want to leave it like this. This is going to simplify to 1 and negative 3. So the midpoint of a line segment that starts at negative 1, negative 2, and ends at 3, negative 4, the midpoint would be 1, negative 3. All right, that's all we got for you today on the distance formula and the midpoint formula. Thank you very much for watching the video. Don't forget to do the problems at the bottom of the page. See you in class.